Welcome to Kibbe on Liberty. Today, perhaps the most important conversation that you will ever have with Andrew Heaton about whether or not Baby Yoda wins in 2020. Check it out.
Hitchhiking, and I got picked up by some farmer kid who spent the day trying to track down a tractor for me, although all the farmers were drunk at an agricultural festival 3 counties over. And so I was like, well, I guess I live here now. Can you take me to the local pub? And there was a biker gang there. And I went there, and I was like, and they're all giving me the weird side eye. And I went, I've had a hell of a day. I crashed my van into your bog. And one of the guys looks up and he goes, was it the bog north of town over by the cairn? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, oh, we've all hit that bog. We'll get you a drink, mate. And after that, I had this gang of bikers that they're all calling out their phones going, Cheesy, there's a lad from America crashed his van into the bog. And I ended up going to biker prom and drank a tremendous amount of scotch, bringing us back to whatever my original point was. So it was a good time.
Well, you got to tell that on camera, so we're going to get rolling because this will be a nice story to tell why we're drinking Scotch whiskey.
Perfect.
Are we ready?
We're rolling. Yep.
Andrew, good to see you again.
You too, Matt. Good to be back.
I've been reading on the internet. Everyone's like, where's Andrew? Where is Andrew? Well, you're right here.
A lot of people don't know this. I've been living in hiding in your loft.
Yeah.
And I'm finally coming out of hiding.
Yeah. And you're either going to have to move on or pay rent.
Yes, that's why I'm coming out of hiding.
Yeah.
I wanted to just stay and do cosplay. And you said, nope, I have to pay my own rent. And I went, well, I'm not going to do that.
So we were just talking, and you spent some time in Scotland, probably having some sort of a midlife crisis, I think.
Yeah, I have those a lot.
Yeah.
I don't know whether that means I'm going to die early or die late, given the amount of midlife crises I've now had.
And you appear to be, based on things I've read on the internet, a Scotch drinker.
Very much so, yes.
Yeah.
I think both in terms of criminal record and the internet. There's many testaments to my a prodigious Scotch appetite.
So I've laid the table, and we have a Glenmorangie, which is quite nice. If you're really a man, the Kilchoman.
Okay.
Which is
that an Islay? Where's that from?
That is an Islay.
Oh, really? Okay.
Am I saying that right?
I've always heard Islay.
Islay. Okay.
But I'm going to do that for this reason. Although, you know what? Is it Dalmore?
Yeah.
That's good stuff too.
Well,
if we really hit it off, am I allowed to come back for seconds?
Yes. Okay.
Well, in that case, if I may, I'm going to go with the. How do you say that? Because I'm not familiar with that one.
Kilchoman.
Kilchoman. I'm going to go with the Islay because Islay tends to be very peaty, and I want your producers to be able to smell it on my breath. I want them to know that I am drinking Scotch even from 7 feet away.
Well, honestly, they've been drinking since noon, so. Right, Logan?
That's right.
And honestly, the production goes a little bit smoother if they've had a couple drinks.
Perfect. Yeah.
I'm not going to be as bold as you. I'm going to have the Glenmorangie. But tell us about your trip to Scotland. You left the blaze and you went on this soul seeking mission.
I did 3 things in short order. I went to Scotland. I performed comedy in Iceland for International Students for Liberty in Iceland. Some of which knew you and Terry, and were speaking very highly of you.
We spoke last year at the same event.
That'd be it. Magnus and all that.
Yeah.
And then I also did stand up at Burning Man. I hung out with Grover Norquist at a trailer at one point. But in Scotland, which was one of the highlights of the summer, I was there. I got to interview Dominic Frisby, who, as I described earlier to you off camera, is like you plus Remy from Reason if you had a kid in England. He's the only musical English libertarian comedian, and another guy that was the Scottish Comedian of the Year last year. And then the really fun part was I rented a camper van and drove around the Highlands because whenever I'm over there, I try and see a new place. And so I rented this camper van, drove around the Highlands. Their roads are 3.5 feet wide, and also Scotland is mostly a bog. As I have come to find out. Now, I'm from Oklahoma, which has good, honest terrain. It is just stalwart,
reliable
soil that you can count on. You can build a house on that soil. Scottish soil, I got to say, is kind of dishonest. You can't trust it. And I pulled so a lot of the roads in the Highlands, they're only big enough for one car. And you'll pull off in a little parking space, and they'll come by. And I did that because I'm polite. But I overshot by a foot, and the whole car, the van, slid down into the bog until it was perched at this very precarious 45-degree angle that, I mean, if you punched it, it would have just rolled off into the creek. And I ended up hitchhiking, and a local kid picked me up, and we drove around for several hours and tried to find farmers with tractors, but all the farmers were drunk at a farming festival like 2 counties over.
Like the crew.
Like the crew, yes, exactly. I would have encountered the Logan of Scotland, and instead I ended up, I called the towing company, and that was no help because they were like, oh, let's see, it's a Thursday. Well, we were taking tomorrow off, and then it's the weekend. We're not going to do that. And then Monday, we're all atheists, but it's the Feast of St. Crispin. We don't work on that day. So if you like, we could probably get to you by the following Thursday. And I'm like, I guess I live here. I live here in Leipster. So I had the kid drive me to the local tavern, and I walked in, and there was a biker gang, all of whom looked like Matt Kibbe, just with longer beards. And
kilts.
Well, they were wearing leather. They had like the black leather thing going on.
Yeah.
And they're all kind of giving me that like old Western saloon side eye thing. And I went
because you're dressed like that.
Because I think actually I was wearing an ostrich skin jacket with this giant turquoise ring. So I looked like I was very much a man of America. But I went, I've had a hell of a day. I crashed my van into your swamp. And one of them looked up and he went, would you have crashed that in the swamp north of town over by the cairn? And I went, yeah. And they went, oh, we've all done that. And then they all nodded in agreement. They started pulling out their phones and like calling old Cheesy and whoever. And I ended up going to biker prom. And I think I am now friends with everyone in Leicester, Scotland. And I got the van out. It all worked out really well.
So Scotland is a cheers.
Cheers. I guess the moral of the story is if you want to make friends in Scotland, drive your van into something.
Yeah.
And people will come just out of both neighborliness and sheer boredom. You will become a local member of the community.
Well, hopefully you stocked up and smuggled tariff-free scotch.
God.
Back to the United States.
I wish I had, because that had not come into fruition while I was over there. Had I known, I would have rented a boat and brought over as much as I could. I was apoplectic when that happened.
Yeah.
That was the I was already not a Trump fan and have not been for some time. But you jack with scotch prices.
Right.
When you use a tariff to affect scotch prices, that's it. Whatever Adam Schiff wants, I'll back him on it. Just that's it. That's fine. Whatever. I'm anti-scotch tariffs.
So I tweeted out at the time, and by the way, just yesterday, the administration announced that they're going after French champagne, French cheese, and they had already gone after Italian wine and Scotch whiskey and Irish whiskey. And I'm like, are you personally targeting my lifestyle? Because
they might just be trying to make everyone in D.C. hate them.
Is this payback for supporting Gary Johnson in 2016? Because it seems personal at this point.
Yeah. Well, that'll learn us for having the gall to buy from foreigners, Matt.
Yes.
How dare we do that?
Some amateur tweeted back, well, we make whiskey in this country. And I'm like, sir, I like bourbon, and bourbon is bourbon, but Scotch whiskey is whiskey.
Yes, I have to say I'm firmly in the Scotch camp on that one. And bourbon to me tastes like Scotch with maple syrup in it. I can't drink it unless it's in a cocktail. I can't drink it. So I'm not doing any of that national patriotism nonsense when it comes to liquor. No, sir.
Well, we could talk about tariffs and we could talk about impeachment. You mentioned Adam Schiff, but I thought everybody talks about that stuff. So I thought we'd talk about something really important, something that really matters. And of course, I'm talking about Baby Yoda.
Yes. The best thing of 2019.
Yeah.
That is the highlight of the year. Fantastic.
And there's so many unanswered questions, and there's frankly a little bit of controversy swirling around. Like is this Yoda's son?
Oh, I hadn't even thought about that.
And
which would also beg the question: is there Lady Yoda?
Yeah.
Is there a hot Mama Yoda?
Yeah.
Hanging out somewhere on Coruscant?
Where's Yoda Mama?
Yeah.
Where is she? And did Yoda do the right thing by her? These are all questions.
No, maybe that's why he went to Dagobah.
Yeah.
Maybe because, you're thinking, like, this is a weird thing that Obi-Wan Kenobi's going to Darth Vader's home planet and changing his name from Obi-Wan Kenobi to Ben Kenobi to try, like, that'll throw him off. How could they ever figure that out unless they've got a phone book? And then, Yoda goes and Yoda goes and hangs out in a swamp to avoid adult responsibility.
Yeah.
I actually really like that.
Yeah. And I think that's going to come out in due time because in the age of the internet, you can't hide these things anymore.
Yeah.
But I worry that Baby Yoda is a bastard child.
You know what? So I do a funny politics podcast, but I just recently launched a sci-fi podcast. And literally before talking to you, I talked to Jonathan Last over at the Bulwark because he is an apologist for the Empire. He believes that the Galactic Empire was a source of order and peace, and that Palpatine represents a kind of Machiavellian dictator you can work with. He's kind of the Pinochet of the stars, right? This is
Bloomberg's view on President Xi in China, by the way.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay, yes. And if it turns out Yoda sired bastard Yoda baby and took no responsibility for them, it would play into Jonathan's argument that the Jedi were a corrupt, institutionally sclerotic organization.
Or it may be Game of Thrones. I mean, this could be sort of a Jon Snow scenario where everyone thinks that Baby Yoda is a bastard and is shunned for the first 750 years of his life.
If it turns out Baby Yoda's a Targaryen, that will be quite
quite
the turn of events.
That would be a bringing
there.
Together of all the mega brands.
That would my head would explode to try to watch that as the successor to Game of Thrones as Baby Yoda rallying the troops to go fight whoever Bran the Broken.
But you tweeted out that sort of an adoring, aggrandizing tweet about Baby Yoda. Mm-hmm. Like, this matters to you.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're both in the political milieu, right? I've been doing the sci-fi stuff, and I'm still doing the political stuff as well. I'm still doing political comedy, but the sci-fi stuff I love because I like science fiction in and of itself. But it's also very important to me that I have some creative outlet that does not force me to exist in a matrix that's us versus them.
Right.
When I'm hanging out, like, I've never called anybody and gone, well, you want to come on my sci-fi podcast? And they go, I don't know, I heard that you're pretty friendly with TOS people. I know you're not TOS, but you are TOS adjacent, and I'm Deep Space Nine. No one ever does that, right? And no one's like, well, I can't.
There is a subreddit for that, by the way.
There are a few people, but I haven't brought them on yet. And no one's worried about me, like, normalizing Battlestar Galactica or anything like that. So the sci-fi is this just wonderful reprieve. And if you ever are getting down, I think you've got a thicker skin than I do, and I'm envious of that. But if you go on Twitter and you just jump into the sci-fi stuff, it's all these wonderful strangers from across the globe that just want to revel in how wonderful science fiction is and have these awesome conversations.
Oddly, I feed on the hate. It seems like the more angry people
you
get
must
at
be
me.
very strong right now. Then this might be the Matt Kibbe origin story if you can feed on the hate.
It improves my mood just to read some of the more ridiculous attacks that you inevitably get whenever you express an opinion about anything.
Yeah.
Maybe even sci-fi, but let's. You tease these, but let's talk about the two podcasts that you're doing right now because anybody watching this show absolutely needs to be a subscriber to these things.
I agree. Thank you, Matt.
I thought you might buy that.
Well, I'll begin with the science fiction one. I recently launched a podcast called Alienating the Audience, and that is a deep dive on science fiction. Occasionally politics wanders into it, but it's not the thrust of it. What I really like doing is I really enjoy exploring the deep themes and constructs and mindset of science fiction. So I did an episode with Tim Sandifer, who we both know, where we're really getting into the mind of Rod Serling, and we're talking about what's motivating the Twilight Zone. What is it? Collectivism? Is it a fear of totalitarianism? Is it nostalgia? What's going on there? What's the world that Rod Serling's trying to show us? I'm about to drop this week a one on Robert Heinlein, which also has all sorts of ideological concepts that are in there. So I really enjoy doing the deep dive, and I'm finding that the people that like the podcast tend to be very hardcore science fiction fans. They're also pretty intense abstract thinkers and like getting into the deep underlying stuff. So that's alienating the audience for the sci-fi nerds.
There does, and certainly Heinlein and others Dick. There's definitely a libertarian ethos and
Definitely Heinlein.
not so much ideology, but just that sense of
Yeah.
individualism and.
Well, Heinlein for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, Heinlein, like there are exceptions, like Starship Troopers is frequently portrayed as a fascist work. But I mean, my read on it is I think if you're writing a book set in a fascist universe, it doesn't necessarily mean you're a fascist.
Right.
I think overall Heinlein is a very, very, very much an individualist. I'd say he's a very horny individualist, since every book by Heinlein I've ever read involves a very attractive female protagonist explaining why she's desperately in love with you, but understands that you need to have sex with other people. There's always that moment.
Well, in fairness, Ayn Rand was a fairly horny individualist as well.
Yeah. Well, actually, I've thought about doing. I've never read. What is her science fiction book? Is it?
It's Anthem.
Anthem.
Yeah.
Which I'm told I would enjoy. I'm not an Ayn Rand fan, but I'm told that I would enjoy that because it's a sci-fi piece.
That was my gateway drug.
Really?
Yeah, it was. And I've told this story 1,000 times, and my producer gets mad at me because I keep telling this story. But my gateway drug to libertarianism was a science fiction rock album called 2112 by Rush, and it's basically a science fiction interpretation of Ayn Rand's Anthem, and it's actually dedicated to Ayn Rand.
Really?
And of course, Anthem itself is sort of a sci-fi take on individualism,
Right.
Rage Against the Machine kind of thing, which is a classic science fiction Matrix kind of thing.
I had no idea Rush did that. That's fascinating. I want to read that because I'm also curious. Like I've been thinking a lot the last few months about kind of where my political bearings are, and for me, I've got like a dual agenda. I want to help people, but also, if you're not hurting anybody, you get to do whatever you want. That's
Right.
pretty much it. That's
Right.
my core philosophy. The helping people thing, I'm very much a utilitarian to the point where I'm very sympathetic, if not openly endorsing, like Norwegian social democracy. But in terms of individuals regulating their own behavior or the relationship between consenting adults, I'm very libertarian. And I don't really seem to fit on any spectrum in American politics at present. Rand, I think, is a speed bump for me because she so extols the virtue of selfishness, which is not really a part of my worldview. And I'll acknowledge, like, Adam Smith aptly points out that the overall economic system benefits from having skin in the game and by being incentivized to contribute to the bigger picture through your own self-aggrandizement. I get that. But the kind of like reflexive, I don't have any obligation to anybody else, and that philosophically is against individualism. I don't really have any overlap with that, which I think why Rand's never really appealed to me.
And I think the wording is a little clumsy, and I've defended her before.
I think she was trolling, right? Like,
yeah.
wasn't she kind of trying to make a splash?
Well, she was either trolling or as a teenager, I believe, who had a young Jewish girl that fled Bolshevik Russia after the communists had taken all of her dad's stuff.
Right.
I think there's some righteous rage against the machine. Leave me the F alone.
Sure.
And I think her use of the word selfish is very different than I think Americans would typically understand it as. Selfish in American nomenclature is sort of it's not self-interested. It's greedy and petty, and I will do anything to you that I need to do to get what I want. And that's not what she's talking about, and that's certainly not what libertarians are talking about.
Yeah.
But I digress. So science fiction.
Good tangent though.
Yeah.
I enjoyed that. Yeah. So science fiction, alienating the audience. So if you're into science fiction, and I suspect that much of your audience is, and I suspect that they would enjoy the abstract spelunking. That's alienating the audience. And I do a weekly political show. So I was doing a daily show. A lot of your listeners or viewers might be familiar, with my old show, Something's Off with Andrew Heaton. I now do a weekly show called The Political Orphanage. And the premise to it's very similar. I don't feel like I belong on red team or blue team. I don't feel like I really belong on the left-right spectrum. And more to the point, I have lots of friends I disagree with. I find it, I'm kind of mystified by the current political environment where we're all supposed to be locked in this Manichaean battle of cosmic forces of good and evil. And I assume I'm wrong about 20% of the stuff I currently believe. I just don't know what part. So I'm open. And I have lots of friends that I think are dead wrong but well-meaning. And I'm happy to be friends with them. And so I'm trying to create a space for people that emotionally resonate with that, where they're looking to have a fun, because it is a comedy show, or at least I do a lot of comedy in it, a fun space rather than a hate space or a bile space. I think a lot of the commentariat is. Are we up to cut that? Should I?
No, we.
You take that. I'll just.
I think I have to put a $20 bill in the jar every time I leave my phone on during a podcast.
No worries. I've now had that happen many times. I think much of the commentariat consists of regurgitating people's opinions back to them and reinforcing their opinion, and then adding a kind of moral self-righteousness to it. I am supremely uninterested in moral self-righteousness.
Yeah.
I am much more interested in kind of making an intellectual journey and exploring things. And the longer I do it, on my show in particular, and this was kind of inadvertent, but I find that I am way more interested in policy and heuristics than I am with who's right and who's wrong. Now, I care about that, clearly, and I have my opinions, and I get into them periodically, but I'm genuinely just more intellectually interested in how do progressives think versus conservatives versus libertarians. So I'm constantly exploring that, and I bring in a lot of political scientists to do that as well.
Yeah. But I think that process of figuring stuff out is the magic of human interaction. It's precisely what Hayek was talking about when he talked about the spontaneous order. And it's humble enough to know that you don't know very much stuff at all.
Yeah. And to hope that there is a marketplace of ideas in which being able to air them, the better ones will rise to the top.
Of course, and we all and me as a libertarian, I'm somewhat doctrinaire. I think there's only one perfect libertarian, and that happens to be me.
Yeah.
And the joke about libertarians is we're not really comfortable until we've chased everyone else out of the room with our doctrinaire views. But this explaining this beautiful chaos of figuring stuff out and not knowing exactly what's going to happen tomorrow, but you have certain expectations, and you know about institutional constraints, and you have families and churches and neighborhoods, all of which sort of hold the world together while you plummet forward in this unknown future. That's a beautiful thing. And the alternative to that, of course, is some politician promising that they're going to make your life better.
Yeah, well, and like something that I've really thought about the last few months is my two big concerns with our country right now are I'm worried about tribalism, which we've touched on, and I'm worried about alienation. I think that there's a ton of people who are, just very lonely and just very disconnected and not a part of any community. And I don't really think that's a partisan issue. I think it's happening.
Yeah.
And everybody can contribute, and I don't mean to ostracize anybody, but one of the good things I think about the libertarian worldview is that it acknowledges that the state can't love you, right? So like to kind of take a general swing at everybody, I think in the 20th century, we learned to fetishize two things. We learned to fetishize markets and the state. So if there's a problem that needs fixing, we're either going to figure out a way to monetize it, or we're going to force somebody to do it. And in reality, I think a lot of the problems that we're facing right now, the answer is not a transaction or the state. The answer is relationships. Now, the beneficial thing about libertarianism, or classical liberalism, or however you want to phrase it, is an acknowledgement that the state can't facilitate an emotional relationship with you. A market can't necessarily do that, although for the record, markets can buy sex. So there's a little bit of a lead there. But ultimately, you're going to have that human component there. And that's not something that you can fiat or you can legislate. That comes from an organic interaction between people rather than the top down.
Yeah, and I think we've always fed into this caricature as market enthusiasts that sort of the intersection of supply and demand is somehow that magic moment where all of our problems are solved. And I think even what some of my intellectual heroes like Mises and Hayek would talk about is the fact that you're never going to get to that point where all of your problems are solved, and it's the process of trying to get there, and it's the friends that are your support structure, and the institutions like families. These things are very important, but we don't talk about that. We talk about markets clear.
Yeah. Well, and I think you're absolutely right about that. I think that there's a kind of misnomer that happens all the time where competition is good insofar as it lowers prices. But there's nothing inherently good about it. Or I'll put it another way. I don't really – I care about your freedom of association and your economic freedom. I don't really care whether or not you're trying to make money or not. I don't think everybody has to do that, right? So like I have made deleterious decisions in my life in terms of finances. It would have made far more sense for me to become an attorney and to do that. But I decided to be a comedian. That wasn't a good call, but it's fine. And I support a lot of my friends to do that. Like if you want to go live in a commune and have shared resources, that's fine. I fully support you. I might well do that. There's something very appealing about having like a tiny house village to me where I know everybody in it. I really like that idea. But
your biker frifriends. I mean, I feel
yeah. They were great. I would totally go back. Well, if I think about it, it's very cold up there. But the key element there is what we're championing is not. It's not you should go make money. Money's good. And it's you should have the ability to freely interact with people, and you get to determine how you do that. If you want to do that by living in a commune where everybody lives in a tiny house and you make wicker baskets, that is 100% fine, and I support you in that wholly, and I hope that it brings you joy and happiness. If you want to be a doctor and you want to go do that, that's fine too. Yeah. You get to determine what the joy is that comes to your life, and you get to determine the nature of the relationship with the people around you.
Yeah. There's a lot of talk amongst young progressives about economic dignity. And I hear this from democratic socialists, and there is that sense of alienation, which I think is very real, and it's a little bizarre to economists like me because they're in a lot of ways they're living in a post-scarcity world. Like they don't get up in the morning and worry about whether or not they're going to eat. They don't worry about whether or not there's heat in the winter.
Right.
Capitalism has essentially solved a lot of these problems. So they're focused on less tangible things like dignity, and I think we could have a conversation about that because I find it sort of fantastical that somehow politics will give you dignity. I don't think there's a piece of legislation or a Trump executive order that's going to restore anybody's dignity.
Maybe I should form I'll reboot the Whigs, which I've thought about doing.
Yeah.
And then have the...
Of course you have.
Have the policy... We are going to fiat dignity.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
First of all, who's going to fight me on that?
Yeah.
We can get that bill
Well,
passed.
you might win, actually.
Yeah, are you pro-dignity? Great.
Yeah.
It doesn't cost you anything. Yeah, I think that's there. Yeah, I mean, I think the two breakdowns that I'm focused on in that regard are there's the distinction between combating poverty versus combating inequality. I am concerned with combating poverty. I think that's a very real, very good conversation to have. It's not the same thing as inequality. It is if the inequality is based on predation.
Right.
If that's the case, then we need to have a conversation about that. But if it's just like you're middle class and also J.K. Rowling's a billionaire, I don't remotely care.
Right.
I'm fine with that gap existing. I think where I would swing more towards the social democrats is I'm very much against legislating the interaction between consenting adults or whatever we do with our bodies. I'm going to drink scotch, smoke a cigar, that kind of thing. I am okay with taxing people in order to create some sort of safety net. So I think where they've got a point, from my viewpoint, is making sure everybody kind of has a standardized starting position that they're able to go with. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with raising taxes to have a floor that's elevated. What I don't want to do is try and get rid of that inequality by lowering the ceiling, which is, I think, a lot of the conversation happening right now is just billionaires are bad. And I don't want to punish success. That's fine. If you want to even tax them to try and raise that floor, I'm okay with that. What I'm not okay with is just being rich is bad, let's get rid of rich people. I think that's Bolshevik thinking that lends itself to a very poor economic model.
Yeah. The challenge has been, and this is where sort of constitutional limits on government actually comes into play, is like the problem with well-sounding safety net type things is that you create a third party. You create sort of a bureaucratic class that at least in modern America, and I think in a lot of places you see in education, in welfare support type programs, that the bureaucratic class actually becomes more important than the patients or the students or the people that are supposedly being helped, and that's where that beast is insatiable.
Well, and I'll give you more ammunition, because the two things that militate against my position that I think about a lot are can you inoculate a population against charity by virtue of having a tax system, right? So I pay my taxes, I don't need to donate to charity, which I don't want that. I think charity is going to be much more responsive and much more interactive than a state is, and I worry about that. The other thing I think can happen is it's very easy to create inadvertent incentives. It's easy to do that. Like UBI appeals to me more because it's just cleaner.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me that it has less bureaucratic pitfalls to it. But you can have those bureaucratic pitfalls. Like I was listening to evil conservative right-wing radio, news radio, or not news radio, Radiolab. Sorry, Radiolab, the evil right-wing Radiolab, right? And they did a great episode, or it might have been This American Life. Either way, it's from NPR and center left to progressive. But they did a story where a woman she's living in New York. She's got a kid with a learning disability, and you can hear the pain in her voice as she's describing the situation where she's getting a federal subsidy because her kid has a learning disability, and she says, like, I would love for my son to do better in school, but if he does, we don't get that money anymore.
Yeah.
And it's like we've put her in a very difficult position now where she basically has to hamstring her kid in order to get that money. And like that kind of thing, I think can happen. You have to be very careful about.
Yeah. But all of these programs are rife with those sort of perverse, unintended consequences.
What do you think about UBI?
I think that UBI, as an economist, I would think that a UBI as a complete replacement for the welfare state, because you theoretically could solve some of the bureaucratic, permanent, like feeding off of the system kind of problems if you could replace it with a UBI, and you probably get less perverse unintended consequences that way. It was tried in one of the Scandinavian countries.
Yeah.
Do you remember which one?
I think they actually got rid of it too, didn't they?
Finland, yeah.
Yeah.
And the theory was, if we just redistribute wealth this way, we'll help people get up off their feet and get jobs. And it had the opposite effect because kids were smoking more bong hits and eating more pizzas. I don't know if they eat pizza in Finland, but you get the point.
Yeah.
But like, it's a deal that would never happen because the political power of this massive machine of middlemen very much dictates the political outcome. So you could conceive of a process by which you could replace the welfare state with UBI that would be less destructive to people's incentive to get their act together. Because what we were talking about earlier, I think, is essential. If dignity is one of the goals of human life, and I think it should be, you can't subsidize it, you can't pay for it, you can't legislate it. You have to do it yourself. And this gets back to my libertarianism. Dignity is hard work. Dignity is uncomfortable. Dignity,
I had to buy a waistcoat,
is that process of failing so much that you actually get to a point where you can achieve something. And I don't think there's a shortcut. And I don't think anything we talk about in public policy is going to give any young progressive that's feeling alienated dignity. They're going to have to figure out how to do it themselves. And we could probably reduce barriers so that they could get out there and achieve. They could be entrepreneurial. They could hopefully get an education that wouldn't bankrupt them. But those are all things that government could do to get out of the way. But I'm not sure government can do things to help them create that process.
The best the government can do is set the stage for fulfillment. There's no way to mandate that.
Yeah.
Yeah. The best thing that it could do is, I think, if you're going to be very, if you're going to lean towards the progressive model, the best it can do is give everybody a fair shake, et cetera, or reduce fear, and provide material stuff. But you can't go from that to having fulfilling life and purpose and friends and family and that kind of thing. Nor would I want a Department of Friends.
Of
we
course.
do the second round?
Well, we're doing a second round because there is a shortcut, albeit temporary, path to dignity, and that is whiskey.
And that is, of course, single malt scotch.
Yeah. And I'm going to go where you went.
Okay, so another of my nascent social democracy positions is I would like some kind of safety net from a healthcare perspective. I don't want single-payer healthcare, or rather, I don't think we could pull it off. But I would like to have some kind of voucher system or national insurance or something like that, kind of akin to food stamps.
Yeah.
I'm guessing you would not be in favor of that, but I'd like to know why.
So if you're gonna do it, and my answer might surprise you a little bit. I don't think national insurance is a good idea. I think it's a horrible idea because you're replacing one set of middle.
That's so good. Dalmore is so good. Thank you for letting me drink this whiskey with you. Sorry, please continue.
See, a little bit of temporary dignity.
Yeah.
So the problem with healthcare is you have middlemen making decisions, and they're price insensitive, and patients don't make decisions based on cost and benefit. And it's the same as, and this sounds callous, but it's the same process of buying food. There's lots of competition. There aren't any overt subsidies for loaves of bread. Therefore, it's cheap and competitive and awesome. But if you wanted to if you could take the current system and get rid of all the third parties, and there's a lot of government regulations going back to FDR.
It's a very regulated industry.
That created business insurance and all that stuff. If you could replace that with vouchers where patients could make choices with doctors and
Which
actually
is what I would advocate for.
Actually ask, like, how much is this going to cost? You would do tremendous things to create an actual market where beautiful things happen and people live longer and choices
I
were
think
made.
for something that massive, there's got to be skin in the game to keep prices down. There's got to be a market mechanism to keep prices down. So I would want something like maybe Singapore.
But there's keep in mind, there is a massive political machine that feeds both political parties.
And I think people forget that it's a really heavily regulated industry. I could be wrong about this, but it's my understanding that by law, if you and I were forming an insurance company, we could not offer people like a $40 a month catastrophic coverage option.
Right.
That would, because right now by law you have to provide X amount of things. Like I'm an independent, I'm a solopreneur. I'm doing this on my own. I would love to have the option of paying $40 a month for catastrophic coverage, because right now my biggest expenditure is healthcare, but I can't. But I have to purchase a certain amount, and that's a regulation that's causing that to happen. It's not the market that's doing that. It's that they're rising the floor in what you're paying for.
So like there's two challenges whenever you come up with a policy idea. There's two challenges. First of all, you think of something that would actually work based on economics and based on scarcity and all the things that go into hopefully reasonable public policy. But then there's the political piece about whether or not creating such a program would be viable and sustainable, because you go in with good ideas, it gets through the political process, and it doesn't even resemble what you set out to do in the first place. And then 30 years later, you get the welfare industrial complex that is literally holding poor people down from being able to, or even allowed to achieve, because they would lose that benefit the moment they rate to make one more dollar.
The welfare cliff, yeah.
So those are all problems, but I want to pivot, because like we could solve poverty, we could solve the healthcare crisis, but we lost track of Baby Yoda.
Right. Yes. Perfect.
Yeah. Why do we focus on something that matters?
That's a good point.
And I was
nobody's going to make a meme of our conversation, Matt. We will make memes of Baby Yoda.
Yeah. I was listening to your sci-fi podcast, which is called, again,
Alienating the Audience.
Nice market placement there. And I was thinking of Baby Yoda, because this is not inconsequential to all of these other problems. I found an article. Some people have heard this, but Axios, which purports to be a serious, I think one of the guys from Politico went over to create Axios.
Yeah.
And the headline of this particular story: Why Baby Yoda Should Scare Michael Bloomberg and Deval Patrick. And Michael Bloomberg and Deval Patrick, of course, are the most recent entrants into the Democratic presidential field.
Deval Patrick's the one from Massachusetts.
Yeah, he's former governor,
right.
and neither one of these guys would be my choice by any means. But the most interesting thing that has been happening in late November is that Baby Yoda has been crushing the entire Democratic presidential field when it comes to interactions on Facebook and Twitter.
Yeah.
Like 2-1. Bernie Sanders is number 2 at 850, and this is like a 2-week period. Baby Yoda is at 1,671, and Tulsi Gabbard is down at 523, but poor Michael Bloomberg is at 171 and Deval Patrick is at 134. So they're being crushed by Baby Yoda. And I should point out that, where is she? She may not even be on the list. But we just lost one of the
Kamala Harris, yeah.
Kamala Harris pulled out of the race. She was getting crushed by Baby Yoda, and I don't want to draw like a clear link to these two things, but I think it's actually true.
Wait, do you think Baby Yoda sucked the air out of the Kamala Harris campaign? Because it's possible.
Well,
like I think impeachment probably has sucked the air out of a lot of campaigns.
Yeah, I think Baby Yoda's killing it on social media, which gets to your point that you made early on when you said you wanted to do like a sci-fi thing. Like people care about Baby Yoda more than they care about the next presidential election.
Yeah,
I think that's absolutely true, and I think it's because they get joy out of Baby Yoda memes, and there is no joy watching a Democratic presidential debate.
Wouldn't it be weird if we had a system that facilitated happiness instead of just anger and bile?
Yeah.
See, I like actually something that I'm not an Elizabeth Warren fan, but something that she did the other day that I thought was a really clever idea was apparently now Elizabeth Warren's dog is running for first dog. And I was like, that's smart because people love dogs, right? So if it's like, hey, like, don't you want Bailey to be the first dog? Also, Elizabeth Warren's going to be president. People are like, yeah, that sounds great. Like maybe we should have a system where we get to elect I would love it if we split the office of the presidency into the head of state who has zero power and the head of government, and we split that into 3 different offices too. And those people we get to kick around. The head of state, we all elect Betty White. Betty White's now Queen of America, but she has zero power. Or Baby Yoda. I'm fine with that too. I think it's. I think that we.
I want to establish paternity before I go all in on Baby Yoda.
Or maybe Betty White gave birth to Baby Yoda. Entirely possible. Because Betty White is 900 years old.
Right.
No, I think this is one of the weird things. So going back to Scotland, where I was this summer, I think the Brits have inadvertently, in the same way that we intentionally decided to separate church and state, they have inadvertently separated reverence from power. And we haven't done that. The president is the chaplain of the country and the seer of seers and the father of the nation and all these things that give him or her a cloak of imperium and gravity and grandeur that I think is incredibly dangerous.
Yeah.
I would love to split that. It would be awesome if we could elect Baby Yoda president of America and then have like a lesser office that's like deputy director of the administrative agenda or whatever that we also vote on. And that's the person handling the executive branch.
Well, I think that's like this tribalism and this winner take all, and you must destroy your enemy, and even being unwilling. And the current debate about impeachment is precisely like this. You can't actually have a conversation about the facts of the case, and
I don't even know what they are.
Yeah. Well, I've avoided it because it's such a sad thing to watch all my friends who I have friends on polar opposites of this debate.
Yeah.
And very few of them actually debate the facts of the case and what is the rule of law in impeachment, what is that process. But what they're fighting over has nothing to do with the facts. It has to do with controlling the presidency, the king, the executive who is now prone, and it just didn't start with Trump, but Trump absolutely is in this category of I'm going to decide. And I'm gonna make things better for my team, and screw all you other guys, and that all goes back to the fact that our government is making too many damn decisions about our lives, and we got to get back to where Baby Yoda matters more, because the culture and the conversation that we have outside of politics, this is where we could actually solve problems.
I agree. Who was it? It might have been the founder of Cato, not Coke, but I can't remember the other one. I can't remember who it is, but they had a quote that like, the best country to live in is one where you're not afraid to drink the water and you can't remember the name of the president.
Yeah,
I think that's about true. Like I would love for that to be such a subset of what's going on that it's like, oh, who's the president? Yeah, John Huntsman. Yeah, I forgot about that, or whoever it is.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
But yeah, that would be wonderful.
Well, I think that's and this whole, we have this debate about where we fit on the political spectrum, and you've embraced this label, social democrat, and I hear those words, and
I'm
like, I believe in social stuff. Like I think people interacting is a good thing, and if democracy means sort of pushing decisions back to the end user, which I think is a broader definition of democracy than the sort of bastardized version where 51% of the public gets to tell 49% what to do. Like
majoritarianism,
that's pretty dangerous stuff. But democracy, where I get to choose which music I listen to and whether or not I'm going to share the Baby Yoda memes until all of my friends unfriend me, that's beautiful, right? That's where that's where humans actually figure out how to get along with each other. But it's not politics. It can't be politics.
Yeah. Well, I don't think politics again will give you the meaning that Baby Yoda will. I think Baby Yoda's always going to come. Baby Yoda's always going to beat. What was it like, Obamacare Pajama Boy or something? You remember that from a couple years ago?
Yeah.
Baby Yoda, hands down, 100%. Insofar as the social democracy goes, I mean, I think either way, the point of what I'm trying to do is to empower individuals. Where I get into trouble in my mind with the goals I'm trying to accomplish, if I'm only concerned with compelling other people by use of force, and that's the only metric that I have, then it seems to me that there will be people that are left behind that just don't have the traction necessary to get ahead. Now, long term, on a macro level, they probably will, in the sense that like 60 years from now, 100 years from now, the rising tide lifts all boats. I think that that's probably true. I'm okay with having a minor redistributive element, just to ensure people have, whatever that is, healthcare, public education, something like that. But in my mind, where I think the conversation's kind of gone astray in American politics is that everything's bundled unnecessarily together. So if you're a progressive, you're in favor of regulating how people interact, how businesses interact, and how people govern their own lives, and where their income goes. And in my mind, you can kind of make a distinction between like a regulatory state versus a welfare state. And I'm more amenable to the welfare state. The regulatory state, I think we're probably pretty much, I guess don't like build nukes in your backyard. Don't anything involving negative externalities maybe is fair game, but anything sub-negative externalities I'm not for. But I'm okay with a little bit of that redistributive element to it. But the end goal is to empower individuals so that they can live full lives.
So your whole experiment is you're trying to reach an audience that wants to have a civil conversation about exactly what we've been talking about, and no like no shaming and no yelling and no kicking people off the island kind of stuff. But the entirety of social media is designed specifically to do all those things.
Right, yeah.
Except for Baby Yoda. But
yeah.
And so tell me how that model's going, because you are currently funded solely on Patreon. You're your own boss, or at least
my audience is.
Your Patreon subscribers are your boss.
Yeah. Well, it's going well. The thing that I'm bolstered by is I'll say social media is not designed for people like me. So I had a guest on my former program that was talking about how Twitter does far better if you are being negative than if you're being positive. Mm-hmm. If Mr. Rogers were alive today, he would probably have less of a following than somebody that's constantly lobbing insults, right? So social media is not great for me. That said, though, I do find that there is a huge thirst for empirical thinking and civil discourse that's not being catered to by all parties, right? Like I said earlier, I think most, not all, but most people in the commentariat are making you feel good about what you already think and getting you riled up about hating the other person. And I think there's a huge swell of people that don't want to fit into that. One of the things that I've really loved and been pleasantly surprised by with the Patreon model is, I had on Charlie Cook from National Review about 2 months ago, and we did reasonably deep policy discussion about gun control. Charlie is much more pro Second Amendment than I am. I'm a moderate on gun control, and I was very worried about that. I thought I have an obligation to be honest to the audience, and I have a either journalistic or comedian obligation to be honest as well. And I was what I found was that the audience was perfectly fine to disagree with me as long as I wasn't being contemptful of them or of Charlie. Mm-hmm. If I went, Charlie, you seem like a good guy, and I'd really like to hear where you're coming from, and maybe I'm wrong, and let's have a good cut. No one minded that at all. There were they did want to contribute and go, I think, Heaton, you're wrong because of X, Y, and Z, but I'm fine with that. I think that's a perfectly worthwhile thing to do, to be like, I enjoy your show. Here's how you could improve your opinion and make things better. That's great. So that's been going well. And the Patreon thing's fantastic too, because I've worked for The Blaze, I've worked for Reason, I worked for Fox Business for a while. In all of those instances, the audience was 2 or 3 levels removed from my boss. Mm-hmm. When I worked for Reason, I had a manager. I liked him very much, but I had a manager, and the manager was talking to the board, and the board in turn was concerned about donors and things like that. And so the actual people watching the videos were not the people that were most directly affected by my decision. Patreon's fantastic in that regard, because if I think about changing something, I can literally go to all the people paying the bills, and I can email all of them and go, I was thinking about doing this with a format. What do you think about that? And get immediate feedback. It's like from a performance standpoint, it's like a really amazing model. I'm really glad it's there.
It's democratic, like a marketplace.
Yeah, I mean, it is literally a marketplace. I mean,
because people can participate or they can choose not to participate, and it's all cool.
And I got to say, from it being a market, like if I'm like, hey, I'm thinking about, I don't know, I'm going to add 20 minutes of horse jokes to every show that I do. What do you think, audience? I am clearly going to pay more attention to the people that are funding the program than I am to the people who aren't. I'm glad everybody's there. That's like, I hope people listen to it. That's wonderful. I'm really thrilled. But the people I work for are the people paying the bills, and I can go, you guys hate horse jokes? I'm going to do horse jokes then. I wouldn't alter my opinion based on that. But the format, the guests, things like that, the topics we cover, I don't know, how I structure the program, all that kind of stuff. I welcome that input, and it's a great model in that regard.
Well, part of your brand is honesty. And I think there is a radical counter-revolution that I talk about a lot on this show, and you could see it somewhat in the intellectual dark web, where people want to have civil conversations, and there appears to be a radical diversity of views amongst the so-called intellectual dark web, and they have all sorts of interesting, sometimes wacky guests on, but people. Clearly, there's a hunger for that alternative to the Shoutfest, Fox versus MSNBC kind of thing. So I'm going to put you on the spot. Will we see a sci-fi podcast on Baby Yoda?
Sure, 100%. I hadn't even thought about it, but yes,
I think you would crush it. And we're going to get to these controversies about whether or not Yoda is a good father.
I think I could do a full episode on Baby Yoda backstory, and get a couple of other hardcore nerds together to come up with how does he I think this is entirely doable. At the very least, we could do a deep dive on Yoda's species, which I'm sure has a ton of scholastic work already existent.
Yeah, for sure. And the final question, will Baby Yoda win in 2020?
God, I hope so. Wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't that be wonderful? If it was Baby Yoda followed by Bailey the dog, and then eventually the highest level of government was like the assistant deputy of the Department of Education or something like that. Like it was, I hope so.
Okay. Where do people find Andrew Heaton?
Thank you. The best 2 places to find me are via the podcast, which is The Political Orphanage and Alienating the Audience. And to a lesser extent, you can find me on Twitter, but I'm honestly much more active on the podcasts than I am on social media.
Okay, thank you. We have to finish these before you go, but we don't want to do that on camera.
We'll drink all 4 of these bottles. Hey, Matt, it's fun to hang out with you. Thank you so much for letting me chill with you when I'm back in D.C.
Yeah, it's good seeing you, man. Thanks for watching Kibbe on Liberty. By now, you know this is the most important event of your week, so make sure you subscribe on YouTube. Click the little bell so you get notifications. Kibbe on Liberty, mostly honest conversations with mostly interesting people.